Sex Info podcast listeners. This is Lisa Butterworth. I am here today with Caron Cordes. And Caron, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right, I'd love to. Thanks for having me. I am a life coach that contracts with Symmetry Solutions, and I got my bachelor's degree in psychology back in 2011, and I have a master's degree in psychology and life coaching. And I, through my own eating disorder recovery and healing process, decided to look for ways that I could gain more knowledge and possibly help people in the future and the topic of eating disorders. And so I did a Google search and I found this program that's abbreviated EDIT, and it was created by Dr. Dory McCubry. EDIT stands for Eating Disorder Intuitive Therapy. And it's a recovery program for people that want to help other people with eating disorders. Basically, it's basically a whole set of skills that was developed by Dr. Dory McCubry, who is an expert in the field, has written books on eating disorders, has recovered from her own eating disorders. She is served on different associations in regard to eating disorders. And she created this program kind of out of her own healing combined with her areas of expertise in her training. She's a therapist and has, I don't know the technical term for it, but she has like another degree also in food science. So she's very educated, and this program is great. It's helped me in my own recovery, and it is helping me now help others. I've worked in settings where I've been able to lead groups with people who struggle with eating disorders, and from all different kinds and all different people representing all different genders, sexual orientations, races. And it's a topic that I think that just needs to get out there more. There's a lot of stigma around it. There's a lot of misconceptions about what it is and who actually has an eating disorder and what's healthy eating and what's not. And it's just hard for people to talk about, whether you're going through it yourself or whether it's someone that you love that's struggling with it. It's just very prevalent. So the statistics are very high. 30 million Americans, according to the National Eating Disorder Association, are struggling this year with eating disorders. And that might not even be fully representative of all people that struggle with body image or disordered eating, because, not everybody reports it. But it's a big deal, and it's a passion of mine because I empathize with it. I lived with it for 12 years, and I'm still working on my own recovery every day. We can never stop our relationship with food. So it's very important to talk about, and I'm excited to do that.
Awesome. So you're here to talk with me about sexuality. We already recorded one podcast that was, more about what the confluence of eating disorders and sexuality looks like, and tell me a little bit more about where you want to go today.
Absolutely. So last time we referenced an article by Zach Verway. He's a counselor at, I believe, Ed Care in Denver. It's an eating disorder treatment place. And he talked about how the way we show up with our eating disorder is often a mirror image of how we show up in sexuality. So we kind of discussed that more in depth in the first podcast. So we don't need to do that as much in this one or the first episode. But from here, it would be a good place because we kind of outlined all the problems, all of the, issues that people with anorexia or bulimia or anything struggle with sexually and behaviorally with their eating disorder, which is kind of not so good news. So it's like now, how can we fix it? How can we work to overcome this and spread awareness? And so I would love to share with everybody more about the EDIT program and how it can overlap and be beneficial for sexuality too. And then we can go from there. And if you want to add any more, Lisa, after we do that, or ask any further questions about that, that would be great too. Or add any info as it relates to sexuality, and we can go from there.
Awesome. So I guess, where do you want to start?
All right. So I can tell you from my personal experience, when I got the job at the eating disorder recovery place, it was evident to me before I really knew a lot of the statistics and read the articles on how it relates to sexuality. It was evident in there was a high number of people there just, in treatment that struggle with body dysmorphia, anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, all kinds of things that were represented in the LGBTQ community. And I don't know if I said that right, but there were several trans people, there were bisexual people, there were non-binary people. And the reason I bring that up in regards to sexuality is that, eating disorders stem from this kind of hyper focus on the body, that we're kind of like ignoring all the aspects of our real true self that exist. Their body is one of them, but we also have our mind, and we also have our spiritual side and our emotional side, and that make up all of who we are. And with eating disorders, there's this really, it's kind of like zooming in on just one part of ourselves so close that we can see every single flaw, and we're just hyper focused on that. And we tend to ignore or discredit or not give it as much needed attention to the other parts of ourself. And for people that, say are born female and identify as male, or vice versa, or grew up in a culture that is not accepting of their sexuality or the way that they identify as and see themselves as, body dysmorphia is a great risk of needing to be. There's people that, that are wishing they could be more masculine shaped, or wishing they could be more feminine shaped, or that are being judged for being too much of one or the other. And so there was a great connect there in sexual identity. And then, as we mentioned about that article, as I've done further research and seen and just hearing the cases of the clients and talking to them one-on-one and in my office and listening also to their stories in group, it was evident too, like we talked about on the last podcast, that the way that they show up with their eating disorder, whether it's restricting or avoiding or what food or isolating, is a lot similar to the way that they show up sexually. So the EDIT program that I'm trained in, this eating disorder intuitive therapist, it wants to take you from this false version of yourself that the eating disorder creates, this hyper focused on one aspect of you, one aspect of the self that usually is distorted in some way or the other. There's people that are 60 pounds that feel that they're fat, and there are people all along on the spectrum of eating disorders as well. But that is something that I have witnessed firsthand, is this complete discrepancy between what they see in themselves and what actually is, or what other people may see. And so there's this need to, as Dr. Dory teaches, to move from this false self, this externally driven, this sort of like outside, what I present to the world version of yourself that's very limited and very, very much excludes all the other parts of you that make you who you are, and then move towards this internal guide, this internal voice of your true self that incorporates all the aspects of who you really are, your body, soul, mind, and spirit. She created a program that does just that. It runs on 5 basic principles, which are love yourself, be true to yourself, believe in yourself, give to yourself, and express yourself. Maybe not in that order, but those are the five main principles. And then she applies mindfulness, and it stems from cognitive behavioral therapy and practices dialectical behavioral therapy, which, if people don't know what that is, it's often used to treat mood disorders like borderline personality disorder. It's all about being in the moment and practicing mindfulness and being in the here and now. And she uses all these principles, and she has worksheets and books and all these sort of things that help these people start to get in touch with the other parts of themselves and a more realistic, more true version of themselves that is their true self, that either has been neglected, shoved down, criticized by the voice of their eating disorder for years and years and years. And so, like, for example, I'll give you an example of, something that, like, I might give to a client who is having a hard time with expressing themselves, in the sense of having these very limiting beliefs about, like, what other people think of them. Like, say their friends cancel plans with them, and their automatic distorted thought would be, well, they don't really like me. And it might go even to, well, they like me better if I lost weight, or if I could look like this, or if I could be better. And then there's this pause where it's like, okay, what evidence is there that supports those thoughts? Okay, they cancel plans all the time. Okay, what other evidence is there? Well, maybe the friend apologized. Okay. Well, based on that they apologized and that they cancel plans a lot, is there something other than you? There's there another thought out there that could explain, other than, oh, they don't really like me? And so then you counter that with, okay, maybe my friend really has time management issues and it's not about me. And then you can identify a new feeling that you have. Instead of, maybe before you were feeling hurt, rejected, now you can say, oh, I have compassion, I have forgiveness for this person, I have time management issues myself, or I'm not perfect, and see a more real, balanced version of what's going on. And so this program really breaks it down to let us look at what is driving our eating disorder, how it is a solution for us in our life, what is it doing for us, what is it helping me cope with, or what is it keeping me safe from, or what is it helping me be able to get out that I can't express otherwise. And then it gives very practical skills down based under those 5 principles on ways that you can practice getting in touch with that true version of yourself, that internal guide that is really there. It's just, and is based from who you really are as a person, all aspects of yourself. It's just been very quieted by this voice of ed, this eating disorder, this false self, this need, this kind of survival that you've been in for so long. And
So,
so,
oh, I
go
was just
ahead.
going to say, help me connect the dots. How would you apply this to someone's sexuality? So you just gave an example of, like, oh, a friend doesn't like me because I keep, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
if
Yeah.
you were to,
Mm-hmm.
connect the dots and talk about, like, what are some of the things you see in people's sexuality and how might this help in that context?
Right. Absolutely. So, okay. So in part 1, we talked about how people with anorexia tend to show up more rigidly in their sexuality, more closed off, less interested in sex in general. And versus where somebody, say, with bulimia is kind of, they're kind of more in mood management mode, where they're kind of up and down, and they're kind of often show up more clingy and fear of abandonment. And so they're trying really hard to please their partners. And so, relating back to sexuality in this example of, so let's change, my friend canceled plans with me, to my partner rejected me sexually or turned me down. And so now I'm feeling, the feeling might be hurt, rejected, I'm not good enough, I'm not attractive, I've got to diet more. All these thoughts could be reeling inside of somebody who feels rejected by their partner. And then, so in the next step, what are the thoughts you had as a result of that event of being rejected? Okay, we kind of just said that, but, like, you know, they don't like me, I need to be different, I need to change to be good enough, or I need to work harder to change something about myself so that I will be what they want. What evidence supports this thought or conclusion about the event that you're saying? Well, they keep rejecting me, and other people in my life seem to accept me more, or my partner accepts me more when I look a certain way, or when I don't be too clingy, or whatever. So if I just lost weight, then they would, accept me more. And then what other evidence counters your thoughts, about this conclusion? Okay, well, you could say, do they only reject you when you're feeling fat? Or whatever you're blaming in that moment, are there other times that they reject you? Or there's other times that they are unavailable? And then based on that, what could be a possible another solution? Well, okay, maybe could be something in my partner. Maybe it's not all my fault. Maybe it's not all about how I showed up. Maybe it's not all about my size, or whatever it is I'm blaming in that moment. And then you could say, okay, with this new thought in mind, that maybe we're two people here working together instead of just it's all on me, what could you be feeling now? You could be like, you could either be feeling compassion for your partner, you might even feel a little frustration with your partner, or you might feel relief that, it's not all because of you. You're not just this flawed human being that makes everything wrong or bad. And then you could write down and complete, what you learned about that. What does that show you? And if you can outline it and journal, and then you can decide, now what do I want to do with this information? Could I show up differently next time? Is there something I could ask my partner? Is there something I could communicate? Could I ask him, how he's feeling? Because maybe he or she or they, how are feeling, in order to better understand, instead of just living with those limiting beliefs that aren't serving me very well and probably aren't serving my partner very well. So, yeah. So that's just kind of one example, but there are many ways that this sort of approach could be applied outside of the eating disorder realm as well. I mean, I know it's written for eating disorders, but we tend to show up a lot in our lives with similar fears in different situations, or similar beliefs about ourselves. Like, say somebody doesn't show up in sexuality because they don't feel confident in that, in their body. And they also don't try out for sports or go to certain social events because they're not confident in their body. And it affects their food choices and create some disordered eating patterns to try to correct that in themselves, this perceived flaw. So these kind of things can show up in many areas of our life. And sometimes when, you're able to identify one limiting belief in one scenario, it can carry across to other scenarios in your life as well, and go, oh, wow, that applies over here as well. So it's a very fascinating thing.
Yeah. One of the ones I see a lot with people who struggle with body issues and their sexuality is sort of the discounting of their own experience in the sexuality, where like they tell themselves, oh, I'm not they don't even tell themselves I'm not enjoying this, but they find that maybe they're not enjoying a sexual encounter, and they interpret that as meaning like there's something wrong with me.
Yes.
Right. Like if I could just do this or that, and I just need to figure this out. Like it's a very internal kind of, rather than like communicating to your partner, like, oh, I'm not enjoying this anymore. Or, oh, I don't really want to do this right now. And so then they force themselves over and over again to do things that they don't really want to do. And then they start to associate sexual experiences with sort of feeling coerced, or, and sometimes the partner really is coercing them, but often they're just coercing themselves.
Yeah, it's kind of like they're coercing themselves to this expectation that they perceive that is there of their partner, maybe, and also this belief or limitation about themselves. So they're seeing it through this lens that may not even be an accurate view of what's really going on. Their partner either may not have that expectation, or it may be a hope, or a desire to connect with them, but it's disordered in the person's eating disorder mind of, I can never be good enough for them. There, you point to a really good point of how strong and how convincing this voice of the eating disorder is. Unfortunately, the rate of eating disorders recovery, I think when I worked at the Eating Disorder Center, one of my colleagues that was doing a training mentioned it's only like 30% recovery. And so when we only have 30% recovery, we have to go, well, why? Why is there only 30% recovery? And I think a lot of it goes back to what you were just saying about this internal dialogue that's going on and these people that are suffering from this disease, and it's not getting checked or balanced or voiced enough because there's so much shame attached to it. There's so much stigma attached to it, and they're so convinced that it's true that it just runs their life, basically. When I was struggling in the height of my eating disorder, nothing else, I can't say nothing else mattered, but nothing mattered as much as fulfilling what the eating disorder was telling me. I got to lose this amount of weight by this time, or this person's going to reject me, or I got to show up this way, or it's better off if I wasn't even around. This dialogue is so forceful, and that it literally controls people's lives, often, unfortunately, because anorexia is like the most deadly of all mental illnesses, and bulimia is deadly as well. It can fight us to the very end in convincing us that it's right. And it's not until we're able to push the pause button, like that person's thinking their partner has this expectation. Okay, let's challenge that. Let's see if that's really true. Let's say it. Like, I love, Mr. Rogers, if it's mentionable, it's manageable kind of a thing that he says, that if we can say it out loud and get out, it interrupts that sort of hamster wheel kind of thought pattern that's going on with somebody that is struggling with an eating disorder and struggling with sexuality and struggling with any limiting, sort of belief in their life or struggle that they're going through in relationships or anything. Are limiting thought patterns that where they travel the path of least resistance. The ones that we've thought the most are the easiest to keep thinking over and over and over again. And so it really takes a stop button. And some people in eating disorder recovery even use that. They use like the red light, yellow light, green light kind of analogy to help them in recovery or to check in with themselves. Like somebody that say they're doing really well for the most part, but they start, noticing that they're canceling social events and stuff. That might be a yellow light moment, where they're kind of like, time to check in, or I'm making assumptions about my partner here that may not be true, and going off of those assumptions before I ever check in with them. Maybe that's a yellow light moment.
I mean, I think I like what you're saying as far as like, the thoughts can be so repetitive and convincing that we're not even recognizing that we're having a thought, right? Like, we just assume that it's true that, like, if we don't have sex with our partner right now, that they are not going to love us anymore. And, like, it doesn't even occur to us that we might say to our partner, oh, like, maybe our partner doesn't actually really want to have sex with us if we're not enjoying it. I mean, I think most of our partners feel that way, right? Like, they really don't want us to be doing something that we're genuinely not liking. And yet here we are, like, gritting our teeth and trying to force ourselves to do this thing that, like, isn't actually right. And because often what happens, what I see happen is that their partner senses on some level that they're not really enjoying it and they're not really there. And yet, because that's not being communicated clearly between them, like, the partner also sort of feels like this vague unease about everything. Like, oh, and yet they want to connect sexually, and their partner keeps saying yes, and yet, like, when they do the sex, it feels like kind of wrong. And so
Mm-hmm.
everybody's sort of sitting there feeling uncomfortable. And,
Mm-hmm.
like one person is thinking, I'm doing this because they won't love me if I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And the other person is like, just confused, like, what's going on here? They said, yes, but this feels wrong, like,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
really, if we could just stop for a second and say, oh, like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm not having fun right now, like that becomes a moment of true connection, especially if we can make space to hear it, like
Mm-hmm.
not take it personally, like not believe that, oh, I did something wrong, but like, oh, okay, like
Mm-hmm.
they're not here. Let's get curious about this, that's another hard skill to learn from either
Mm-hmm.
side. But
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a great point because of like seeing how it's kind of like this little dance, like people with their partner are maybe assuming something that's not true. And if you strip away all of the negatives and you look at the truths that are existing in that little dance, they both care about what the other people think. Neither of them really want to hurt the other person. Neither of them really want to use the other person. Neither of them maybe will enjoy it if the other person's not happy. But those other little murky things, that whether it's the voice of the eating disorder or the person that is in partner with somebody with eating disorder, making it like their fault. Oh my gosh, I had sex with them when they didn't want to. What kind of person am I? All these sort of things that our mind can just like kind of get lost in, helps us from being able to see what is really true there, which is that they both care about each other and they both love each other. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not unconditionally, but they do. And then what intimacy that could happen is often lost. And I was thinking about what you were saying, like checking in with our thoughts. One of the worksheets that is given to people a lot that struggle with binge eating, because binge eating, whether it's for bulimia, like you're going to binge and purge, or binge eating disorder where you don't purge, either one, this sort of emotional, eating where you're trying to stabilize whatever's going on internally inside of you or numb out from it, it's very mindless. Not meaning that they're dumb or stupid or anything like that. It's a very real thing that happens. People can say, oh my gosh, I was hungry and then I ate all this stuff and I have no idea how I got from point A to point Z. And so this particular worksheet is kind of like a journal where it has you list every single possible choice, and it takes a lot of practice, but that you could have made, instead of like, well, I could have binged or I could have not, and I did, and so therefore I'm a failure. There's so many choices along that path, between I'm going to go to the store and buy a cake and eat the whole thing, to I walked to the car, I unlocked the car, I opened the door, I got in the driver's seat, I turned on the car, I drove out of my driveway, or all the way to the point of I'm halfway through the cake, I could stop now, I could throw the rest away, or I binged, I could keep going and not purge, or I could purge and try again tomorrow. There is countless choices between here and there. And showing up with someone, with your partner, instead of I just have to show up by either having sex or avoiding it. Those are my two choices. Those are the only ones I know. And if I do this, if I do one, I'm not happy because I'm just going along, and then I'm resentful and it feels fake and I hate it. Or if I avoid, then I feel guilty because I'm hurting my partner and I'm being neglectful, and that doesn't feel good either. And so you can feel extremely stuck, if you will, in one choice or the other. And part of eating disorder recovery, and probably the recovery and our own sexual health within a relationship or individually or whatever, is recognizing how many choices are available. I'm a big, I don't know, advocate for people finding choices that worked for them. People finding whatever it is, however silly it may seem to another person. One person taught me to say with my partner, it was a coach I had during some marital struggles my husband and I were having. She taught me to say, aren't I cute? Yep, I did that again. I avoided you, or I attacked you. Aren't I cute? And maybe there's time where you're like, no, you're not cute. This is not the moment for that. But I would say 9 times out of 10 for me, that may not be something that works for somebody else. But for 9 times out of 10 for my husband and I, it worked to diffuse the situation and go, yep, I'm still thinking that. I'm still thinking that's the only choice. Why? And then we would be able to talk about it. And so somebody that you're seeing as an individual may need to practice it over and over with you in order to be able to feel safe enough to practice it with their partner, or they may journal it. Everybody's different, but it's just something that takes practice. It's like learning a new skill. Like you don't just get on a bike as a kid and know how to ride it perfectly. Relationships, sexuality, eating healthy, being in tune with our feelings and our emotions and recognizing them, being aware of choices that we have at our disposal takes practice. It's something that I'm still practicing, that I will continue to practice, and I'm a complete advocate for do it the way that works for you, as long as you are moving towards balance and happiness in your life. Because eating disorders are working, otherwise people wouldn't be doing them. But are they working to lead to your happiness? Are they working in a way on all aspects of yourself? Or are they just working in one really well? And are they working to fulfill who you truly are? Or are they working to fulfill that need, that pull, that voice of the eating disorder that actually is false?
Right. You know, one of the things that I will teach my clients is a fire drill. It sounds a lot like what you're talking about. You know, like our brains are wired in some pretty funny ways where if we feel like triggered by something or like afraid of something or, you know, just whatever, like our heart rate goes up, we maybe have some adrenaline and cortisol running through our body. It can be almost impossible in those moments when we feel like overwhelmed to feel like we're choosing something. And so that's one of the reasons why, you know, like we have elementary children practice fire drills, because there's a certain number of people in the world who, when they hear a loud noise, they freeze. And it's not a voluntary response. They can't choose to not freeze. And so having a fire alarm isn't enough. You also have to know what to do when you hear the fire alarm, and not just know it like intellectually. You have to practice it with your body, because knowing something intellectually, that isn't going to be available to you when you're suddenly filled with anxiety or dread or fear. Like you can't know that you should do X, but you know, like when you're frozen, right? Like when you're literally frozen. And so you have to like physically practice a different option in order for that to be an option that's available to you. And so that's the reason why we have fire drills, because children who every time they hear a loud noise have been trained over and over again to physically stand up and walk out of the building are much more likely to live when that happens for real, because they have physically trained to do something different. And so, but you know, like when you're trying to make a fire drill for yourself, like if you know that like, so when my partner starts to make sexual overtures to me, I freeze and just let him do whatever he wants to me, or let her do whatever she wants to me, or let them do whatever they want to me. And I'm not present, I'm not enjoying myself, but I also feel like I don't know what else to do, right? Like in a situation like that, where you know, like you might want to approach it in a different way, but you don't even know how. It isn't in that moment when you're like in the thing that you've done over and over again, that you choose to make a new choice, right? Like if you've done something over and over, if for the last 10 years you have frozen and let your partner have sex with you while you disassociated, in that moment, when you're disassociating, that is the moment to choose to do something different, right? Like you can't, you literally can't. And so
Mm-hmm.
practicing something different requires like some planning and some guesswork and like, well, how would I like ideally I could like write a script for what happened. Then what are some small steps I might do on the way to get there? And how can I like plan out, like with the fire drill, how can I plan out a route out of the building and then
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
practice that, physically practice it so that it's an option for me if I feel myself disassociating during a sexual experience? How can
Mm-hmm.
I, like maybe I talk to my partner prior to it and explain to them what's happening to me and how I want to have a different outcome. And then maybe we can draw up some goals together, and maybe I'll have some safe words that I can say that my partner, like if I start disassociating, that all I have to do is say this word, and then my partner will know it's time to like take a pause and reconnect and ground ourselves, or like
Mm-hmm.
things like
Yeah.
that, like where we're really like looking at what are these like sort of instinctual or habitual patterns that I am caught up in, and how can I
Mm-hmm.
plan and then practice implementing a different
Mm-hmm.
way of approaching it.
Oh, I love that so much. I love everything you just said. That is so true, because if we can't feel it and imagine how it'll experience it, it's very hard to do it. And we will, in the moment, like the fire drill, do the path of least resistance. And so we want to practice outside of that moment to make what will save us be the path of least resistance. But it does take a lot of practice. And so, like when you were saying that, oh, I love that so much, the safe word idea, because that could apply, in a sexual encounter with your husband. It could apply in an argument. It could apply at the dinner table where somebody's like, you're not eating, why aren't you eating, or something like that. You could just, if you start to practice recognizing over time those things in your body, maybe your heart starts to beat faster, or maybe you start to zone out a little bit or disconnect, or maybe you feel something else, some other physical sensation in your body. You can write all these down and identify them and practice them, so that when they start to come up, you're like, oh, it's that. It's
Right.
something I have a name for. It's something that I can identify. It's not something that's going to kill me or overwhelm me or whatever. I can identify and go, wait, pause. But that pause gives you that moment to kind of collect your thoughts. And I really like that, because a lot of times, most of the time, we're not operating in a super high level of awareness. And that shows up in sexuality, and it shows up in eating disorder behaviors. And so, like, for somebody who is disassociating during sex, and they're probably avoiding, say, trigger foods, because people with eating disorders often have trigger foods, whether it's a food that they will not eat or they will avoid, they will never even purchase or put in their house, they won't be in the same room as it, because they don't feel they can control themselves around it, or that it's going to make them fat. It's very high anxiety with these trigger foods. And same in sexuality. He touched me here. That's a trigger, meaning I'm going to have to go to this place, and then, or we're going to have sex, and then my mind starts doing the hamster wheel thing again, or I disassociate completely. And so when there is this trigger, or we start to recognize what happens in our body when the trigger happens, having that safe pause, whatever it is, stop, whatever works for the person, then that allows them to kind of take a deep breath, ground themselves back into this moment. Am I hurt? Am I going to die? Is this going to overwhelm me completely? No, I'm safe. I am here.
Sometimes even more simple than that, like, like, oh, I can see the ceiling, I can see the floor, I can see my hands and feet, like even
Oh
more
yeah,
simple than
yeah, like,
asking the questions, right? Like, oh, here
for
I am
sure.
in my body. Okay, I'm here, I'm here.
Yeah, for sure. Like, for the, even like there's like the 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste, as a way to ground yourself, just
Right,
identifying something in
right.
your environment. Yeah.
And
Yeah, it can be
that
very
can be
simple.
especially powerful if it's something you can do with a partner, right? Like if that's
Mhm.
something you can practice when you're not triggered, like something you can practice when you're not feeling, disassociated, or then it's something that's going to be more available to you in those moments when your awareness returns and you recognize, oh wait, I just disassociated, right? Like, and it's a process, right? Like, I feel like it's one of those things where, at first you might be 5 miles down the road before you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm disassociated, or or I've gone into like the monkey mind and my thoughts are racing, or, like whatever your sort of thing is that you do. Sometimes you can be a mile down the road, sometimes maybe just a few feet. But over time, the more awareness you have, sometimes you can even see yourself sneaking up on it before you even get there, and then you can like readjust, right? But it just depends on what the trigger is and how well you slept the night before, and like 500 other things going on in your life.
Yeah, for sure. Like some of the coaching techniques I've learned is identifying even on a number scale, and ahead of time having a conversation, exactly what you said, when you're not in the trigger moment, being like, hey honey, or whatever you call your partner,
Sugar plum.
Yeah, yeah, honey bunches, or whatever. If you're, able to say ahead of time, so I might pause, I'm going to use this word, I'm gonna, like, maybe I'll give you a number. This is 1 means I'm, just a little bit triggered. 10 means I'm off the charts. So you kind of know where I am, and that way they know what you're doing. You don't just pause in the middle and go, I need a pause, and they have no idea why, or they think that they did something wrong maybe. And so they know what to expect. They know that dialogue, what it means to you, what you're trying to say ahead of time. So in the moment, it can just be like, you use the pause word. I'm at a 3, or I'm at a 7, or I'm at a 9. And one thing too that, has helped me personally in my own relationship is to be able to say, you matter to me. I'm having these feelings right now. I'm at a 7 or I'm at an 8. And you not but and you matter to me. Could we come back to this in 20 minutes? Could we talk about it? Could we come back to it tomorrow? Could we take a deep breath? Could you just hold my hand for a minute? We can always make requests. They may not always go along with it, but like you said, most people don't want to force their partner into a situation that they don't want to be in. And so just the idea that you're considering their feelings enough to make a request, and this is true of partners with people that are struggling with eating disorders, not just the person who's struggling, but it could be the partner that says, I'm feeling a desire to connect with you, but I'm kind of at a level 5 because I'm feeling a little insecure about rejection or whatever. Are you up for talking about it? Or if you're, and just kind of like using terms that let the other person know, for one, they're not on the spot to solve it that instant. And for another, that you do care about their experience. And for people with eating disorders in particular, we're extremely hard on ourselves. There's so much shame. There's so much guilt that drives eating disorder behaviors. We're so internally abusive that it can create a cycle of self-loathing and almost groveling, like, oh yeah, it's just me, I'm broken, I'm wrong, I'm to blame, I need to change, to getting fed up with that kind of constant putting themselves down, and in moments of acting out and being like, no, it's all your fault. And it can be very, I guess, surprising to their partner, or like, where is this coming from? And it's just taking those times, like you said, to practice and slow down and practice outside of the trigger moment, so that we go, oh, that's what that is. Aren't I cute? Or what do I need? Or, and having compassion with ourselves. I'm getting ready to start a group. It starts October 1st. It'll run for 6 weeks. And it's an opportunity to come in where with other people that they may not have the exact same struggle that you do. Maybe they have body dysmorphia, but they don't necessarily struggle as much with disordered eating, or they do, but it's not a clinically, to a level to where it's clinically diagnosable, or that they're going to be sent to a treatment center because it's threatening their life. Or there might be somebody that's extremely critical, or or you might be struggle with anorexia and be terrified of food. And then there's somebody on the way other side that has a love-hate relationship with food as well, and can never stop thinking about food and uses food as an immediate, either emotional release or comfort or balancer or whatever. So there's all different kinds of people. There's something very powerful about people on all sides or all spots in this spectrum, if you will, of eating disorders, that when we share our experience, we're like, oh, I had no idea. Like when I was struggling with bulimia, for example, I was jealous of people with anorexia because I'm like, well, they're skinny. They have more control than me. I'm all over the place. Why can't I be like them? And it just gives you a chance to share your truth, take the paper bag off your head, if you will, and show what you perceive as warts underneath, and be like, oh, maybe they don't see it that way. Maybe they don't see my warts. Maybe they have warts too, or maybe they have fears too. And maybe it's not just easy for them. And it can be such a healing and connective human experience that sheds a lot of that kind of holistic, more true version of reality than what the eating disorder has been teaching us to believe. So we're going to be it's going to run 6 weeks. We're going to the first week, we'll introduce the topic. We'll get to know each other a little bit. It'll be on Zoom. And then the other 5 weeks we're going to spend on each one of the 5 principles, starting with love yourself and ending, I think the last one's believe in yourself.
And how would someone find that to sign up?
So I've shared it on my personal page. It's shared on the Symmetry Facebook page as well, but we can provide the link below this podcast as well that takes you directly to the event and to my page, tells you all about me and what the group will look like. We can include that, with this episode so that you can find out more information about that. And then it'll just be a chance to practice in a safe space where, my approach is extremely empathetic. I have done so many stupid things in my past when I was struggling that now I can have compassion for and go, oh, I wasn't a stupid person. I was surviving. And I was lovable.
Sorry.
No,
You're
go
lovable,
ahead.
that's for sure. One of the things that I think can be really useful is, like we were talking about before, that like our own stories become so practiced and so easy for us to tell that we don't even see them as stories, they just feel like truth. But when we see other people telling stories that are similar to our own, or even if they're kind of different, but they're enough, like we can see so clearly that that's a story that they're telling when it's not our story, when it's not the story that we've practiced. And I think that process of, hearing other people tell their stories can really help us to see the ways in which we are trapped in our own stories, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It does. It just gives the whole view more. It gives you more of a perspective, like stepping back and like say you're right up against the wall and all you can see is right in front of you, and you step back and then you see this beautiful picture and you're like, oh, I had no idea that that's what that meant, or that their story over here was like this. And it just can give you this much clearer view. And I wrote a poem that I'm turning into a children's book. I have an illustrator working on it right now. And it's called, Is This the Me That I Should Be? And I've shared the video of me reading it on Symmetry, but I could read it here if you'd like.
I'd love that.
Okay, so thank you. So I'll read it, and it'll be an example of just reframing. It's like taking what you're seeing about yourself that is so awful, and being willing to look at it and step back and see the whole picture and see it in a different way. So my daughter was struggling with self-esteem in kindergarten because she cut her hair really short and people had called her a boy. And we were having this conversation about how, like, I didn't like the spaces in my teeth growing up, and I didn't like this, or I wished I was this or that. And then so I wrote this poem out of that conversation. So it's kind of dedicated to her and I, but to anybody who's hard on themselves. So it's called, Is This the Me That I Should Be? It says, is this the me that I should be? I'm really not too sure. My hair isn't long, my arms aren't that strong. Why can't I look like her? If I close my eyes good and tight, then I can make believe that my tummy is flat, I look good in a hat, and I even like my teeth. They are all there with some teeth to spare, they even look pretty straight. I can eat till I'm full, foods that aren't dull, and not even think of my weight. I am trim and tall, my eyes aren't too small, my face is oval, not round. I have just one chin, my hair isn't too thin, and flows all the way down to the ground. If these things could be the me that is me, then I wouldn't be so sad. I'd be someone to love just right, good enough, never wrong or bad. I let out a sigh as I open one eye, and squinting I take a peek. But there she is again, the girl with two chins, and arms so pathetically weak. With a smile that has spaces in all the wrong places, pudgy tummy and all. Her face is round, hair far from the ground, her body is short, not tall. It just can't be that this is the me I'm supposed to be every day. Okay, one last time, I'm closing my eyes and I'm wishing this girl away. But then in my tummy, I feel something funny as I think of saying goodbye to this me that is me, the me that is she. I think I feel sad, but why? I lift up my two chins and look once again at the girl looking back at me. I look at her face and see that the shape looks just like my daddy. My eyes are still small, but smallness and all, they let me see what I see. They look all around, are beautiful brown. Without them, I wouldn't be me. My teeth do have spaces, but that's great for making faces and sticking your tongue in between. I have a nose that will wrinkle each time that I giggle. Pretty darn cute, don't you think? I'm still not tall. My hair's not long at all, but it doesn't hurt to be brushed. I have enough to eat and really cute cheeks, especially when they are flushed. I skip and I hop and I climb up on top and jump all the way down to the ground. I dance and I slide and I sway side to side and twirl around and around. My little round belly is soft and so cuddly, it's really the best to tickle. I can wear hats on this hair without rats and smile to show off my dimples. Looking at the me that is supposedly she, I think and I start to wonder that maybe this me that is she, is good enough for people to love her. Maybe this me I should be, is full of enough love to give it to others, friends, even brothers, no matter in what shape they come. So that's it.
I love that. I feel a little verklempt.
Thank
So
you.
good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And sorry, I just interrupted. What?
No, no, you're good. Interrupt away. No, I was just going to say that, you know, I have spent so much of my life, when I was younger especially, just beating myself up, thinking there was something about me that if I could change, then it would make everything okay. And people with eating disorders, people that have struggles in their sexuality or showing up with their partner, you know, that's probably something that they can relate to as well. That's probably what they're thinking as well. If I could just like sex more, if I could just be okay around fried foods, if I could just be this size and eat whatever I want, if I could just change this about me, then I would be good enough and everything would fall into place. And until we are able to stop those processes, like you said, practice, and then use these new skills to implement those in those situations, that over time we actually are able to adjust the way that we see ourselves and the people around us, and create safe situations enough times that we actually feel safe in those situations, whether it's with our partner or with food, that can actually be our experience, you know, then it'll continue and it'll be very sad and very lonely and isolating. But I'm here to tell everybody that it's possible. If somebody had told me like 15 years ago that I would be able to look in the mirror even less skinny than I was at that time and absolutely look in the mirror, maybe not every moment of every day, but look in the mirror and say, I love you, you matter, and mean it, or that I could sit with my feelings or look my partner in the eyes without running and hiding under the table, that I would have thought they were crazy, or that they were saying to me that fairies exist and, that there's some life at the end of some magical rainbow. That's about how serious I would have taken what they said. But I do know that with practice and time and patience with yourself and application of new tools and support and hearing 100 times over from yourself and others, 1,000 times over, that you're good enough, you matter, you're worth it. When I used to lead groups at the center, I would say at the end of the group, everybody here that matters, say I. And they timidly hold up their hand and say I. But I matter, you matter. Healing is possible. It's just a day at a time. And so if you want to join us in that group and learn some more of these skills that have helped me and helped others, I would love to meet you there. I would love to hear your story. It would be my honor to do so.
That is awesome. When does it start again?
October 1st. It'll be on Thursdays, 8 o'clock Mountain Time to about 9:30. And it'll run for 6 weeks. And then if there's more interest or there's a time of day that works better for people than Thursday nights, we can start another group as well after that. And this will be for adults, but if there's enough need in the future, I'd be happy to. I have led groups with teenagers as well. There is differences in just that make that kind of connection not impossible, but it just makes it a little bit difficult to, for everybody to relate to each other. So it's better to usually separate them. But this will be for adults, but if there is further interest, I'd be happy to do one for teenagers as well. If you have kids that are suffering, and I would invite anybody that wants to be a part of it. If you have somebody in your life that needs this and you don't understand it and you just want to come to the group to voice your experience and your side of it, that could be healing. And you could also learn a lot too. So
awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Lisa. It's been a pleasure.
We took the long road home, turned minutes into miles, and as the evening traveled on, the sunset bathed your smile. We stopped beneath the desert stars, wrapped in each other's arms. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth.
It's been a long road here, a trail with tears, pain and sorrow too.
But through every storm we traveled on, like lovers do. And if sometimes we fell apart, we always came back home. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth. Some people say love is blind and forever is too long. But I see your eyes in every sunrise. Can't imagine life alone. Let's take the long road on together until we're gone. Want you by my side till the day I die and into the beyond. It's as simple as our love is. That's how I wanna go, all wrapped up in the arms of our extraordinary, it's nothing ordinary love. Ordinary. No, it's extraordinary love.